The sun was setting over the dry Texas hills, spreading soft orange light across the land. The town of Millstone looked quiet from a distance, but one small house on the edge of town was filled with pain and silence. Inside, a woman named Clara sat on the floor holding her two little boys close. Her face was swollen, her dress torn, and her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. She had endured another night of pain from the man who promised to protect her, but only brought her sorrow. For years, Clara had lived in fear. Her husband was once a hard-working ranch hand, but drink had turned him cruel. When their second son was born, he began saying she had cursed him with bad luck. He believed boys were a burden, that girls brought good fortune. Every time money ran low or crops failed, he blamed her. He would shout that she was useless, that she had brought shame to his life. That night he had been drinking again. When he came home, the children hid under the bed, clutching each other's hands, too scared to cry. They heard his angry voice, the crash of a chair, and their mother's soft cries. It was a sound no child should ever hear. When it was over, he left, slamming the door so hard that dust fell from the ceiling. Clara didn't move for a long time. Her hands trembled as she wiped the blood from her lip. She turned to her boys and tried to smile. "It's all right now," she whispered. "Mama's here." But deep down, she knew things would only get worse. The next morning, the town went on as if nothing had happened. Some folks knew what went on in that house, but no one spoke of it. People in small towns often turned away from other people's pain. It was easier that way, but one man didn't. Samuel Price was a quiet rancher who lived miles away from town. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and worked harder than any man around. He had once been married, but his wife had died young. Since then, he had lived alone with his horses and cattle. He didn't talk much, but everyone knew he had a strong sense of right and wrong. That morning, Samuel rode into town to buy feed for his animals. As he tied his horse outside the general store, he heard two men talking nearby. "Did you hear about Clara?" one asked. "That poor woman got it bad again last night. Her husband's gone and left her." The other man laughed bitterly. "Can't say I'm surprised. She should have left him long ago." Samuel froze. He looked up sharply, his eyes narrowing. He had heard stories before, but he never liked gossip. Still, there was something in the way they spoke, a kind of careless cruelty, that made his stomach turn. Without saying a word, he finished paying for his supplies, mounted his horse, and rode toward the outskirts of town. When he reached the small house, he saw the door hanging open. The place looked broken, almost abandoned. He stepped off his horse, his boots crunching in the dirt. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and sadness. Then he saw her. Clara sat against the wall, her head bowed, her hair tangled, her arms wrapped protectively around her children. The sight hit Samuel deep in his chest. He had seen pain before, on the battlefield, in men who had lost everything. But this was different. This was quiet suffering, the kind that didn't make a sound. He took off his hat and spoke gently. "Ma'am," he said, "you can't stay here." Clara lifted her head, startled. Her voice was weak and shaky. "Who are you?" "Name's Samuel Price," he said simply. "I got a ranch a few miles from here. You and your boys can come with me." She shook her head slowly. "I can't. He'll come back. He'll be angry if he finds us gone." Samuel looked around the broken room, the overturned chair, the cracked wall. His voice turned firm. "If he cared for you, he wouldn't have left you like this." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to trust him, but fear had been her companion for too long. "I don't even know you," she whispered. Samuel knelt down to meet her eyes. "You don't have to, but I'm not leaving you here to die. You and those boys deserve a chance." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind through the doorway. Then Clara nodded faintly. "All right," she whispered. Samuel helped her to her feet as gently as he could. Her hands were cold and she leaned on him for balance. The two little boys clung to her skirt, staring up at the tall stranger with wide, frightened eyes. Samuel gave them a small smile. "You boys ever been on a horse before?" They shook their heads. "Well," he said softly, "today's the day." Outside, his brown mare waited patiently. Samuel lifted the boys onto the saddle first, then helped Clara up behind them. He tied her small bundle of belongings, just a torn blanket and a few clothes, to the saddle horn. "Hold on tight," he said, climbing up front. The ride was long and quiet. The land stretched endlessly, dusty roads, dry grass, and faraway mountains glowing under the sun. The children slowly relaxed, resting their heads against their mother's arms. Clara's heart pounded as the town disappeared behind them. She didn't know what waited ahead, but something deep inside told her she was leaving behind her nightmare. When they reached Samuel's ranch, she stared in silence. The land was wide and open, with green patches near the creek, wooden fences, and a small but strong-looking house. A few cows grazed in the distance. "This is home," Samuel said quietly. He helped her down, then the boys. "You can rest inside," he told her. "I'll fix something to eat." Clara hesitated. "You're being too kind," she murmured. Samuel shrugged slightly. "Kindness doesn't cost me anything," he said. "And you look like you need a fresh start." He showed them the spare room, simple but clean, and brought her water to wash her wounds. His hands were rough from years of work, yet gentle as he cleaned her cuts. The boys sat nearby, watching him carefully. When Samuel smiled at them, they smiled back for the first time in days. Later that evening, Clara stood on the porch, watching the sky fade into deep blue. Her sons were asleep inside, and Samuel was sitting quietly with his coffee. She wanted to thank him, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she said softly, "I don't know why you helped me." Samuel looked at her for a long moment. "Because once," he said, "someone helped me when I had nothing. I figure it's my turn." Something in his calm voice made her chest tighten. She nodded and looked away, wiping a tear before he could see it. Days passed, and the ranch became a place of peace. Clara helped in the kitchen, cooked meals, and mended old clothes. The boys followed Samuel everywhere, asking questions about horses, ropes, and cattle. He taught them little things: how to feed a horse, how to hammer a fence post, how to whistle loud enough to call a dog. Their laughter began to fill the empty ranch. For the first time in years, Clara smiled without fear. She still woke up at night sometimes, trembling from old memories, but she'd hear the steady creak of Samuel's chair on the porch and know she wasn't alone. But one afternoon, everything changed. Samuel was fixing a fence near the barn when he noticed a trail of dust far off in the distance, a group of riders coming fast. He wiped the sweat from his brow and squinted. His gut told him something wasn't right. He walked back to the porch, his rifle in hand. Clara stepped outside, her face pale. She didn't need to ask. She already knew. 3 men rode up, stopping in front of the gate. The leader was big and mean-looking, with a scar across his cheek and anger burning in his eyes. "You've got something that belongs to me," the man growled. Samuel stood tall. "You're mistaken." The man pointed at the house. "That woman. She's my wife. You think you can take her from me?" Clara gasped and stepped back, clutching her children close. Samuel's voice stayed calm, but there was iron in it. "You beat her. You left her to die. She doesn't belong to you." The man's face twisted in rage. "You best stay out of this, rancher." Samuel didn't blink. "Then don't bring your trouble to my land." The wind went still. Even the horses seemed to sense what was about to happen. Inside, Clara whispered a prayer, holding her sons tight. She could see in Samuel's eyes that he wasn't going to let them be taken. Not again. The air around the ranch was heavy and still. The 3 men on horseback waited, their faces hard, their eyes full of anger. Samuel stood tall on the porch, his rifle resting in his hands, but his voice stayed calm. He had seen this kind of moment before, the kind where one wrong word could turn silence into violence. Clara stood behind the door, holding her 2 boys close. Her heart was pounding so fast she could barely breathe. She had seen that scarred man's rage too many times, but this time something felt different. This time she wasn't alone. The man spat into the dust and glared at Samuel. "You think you're some kind of hero? You don't know what you're doing. That woman belongs to me. I paid for that house, I fed her, Samuel's voice cut through his words like a sharp blade. "You don't own people. Not her, not those boys. You lost the right to call them yours the day you raised your hand against them." The other 2 riders shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to someone standing up to their leader. But the scarred man only laughed, a cruel sound that echoed across the quiet ranch. "You think you can hide her? You think you can fight me?" Samuel stepped down from the porch. His boots sank slightly into the dirt as he approached. "I don't fight unless I have to," he said slowly. "But if you lay one more finger on her or those boys, you'll regret it." The man's hand twitched near his belt. His anger boiled over and he barked, "You're gonna regret this, rancher." He reached for his gun. Before he could pull it, Samuel's voice thundered, "Don't!" For a moment, even the wind seemed to stop. Samuel didn't lift his rifle, but his stance said everything. He wasn't bluffing. His eyes held a calm strength that came from years of surviving things worse than this. The scarred man hesitated, his confidence cracking for just a second. Then one of his men whispered, "Boss, maybe we should just go." "This ain't worth it," but pride was a dangerous thing. The leader sneered, glaring toward the house. "You think you can keep her forever? She'll crawl back to me just like she always did." Inside, Clara trembled. Those words hit deep, reminders of years when she had believed she couldn't escape. But now she looked at her sons' faces, saw the fear in their eyes, and something in her heart changed. She wasn't that broken woman anymore. She stepped out onto the porch. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. "No," she said. "I won't crawl back. Not ever again." The man's head snapped toward her. "You dare talk to me like that?" Samuel moved slightly in front of her, his body forming a shield. But Clara placed a hand on his arm. "Let me speak," she said softly. Samuel hesitated, then nodded. Clara faced her husband, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each word. "You don't scare me anymore. You tried to break me, but you failed. These boys, they deserve a life better than what you gave us. And this man?" She gestured toward Samuel. "He's shown them what kindness looks like. What real strength is," the man sneered. "You think he loves you?" "He's just pitying you." Clara shook her head slowly. "Maybe, but even pity is more mercy than you ever gave." Samuel's jaw tightened. The scarred man's face twisted with rage, but something else flickered behind his eyes. Fear. He wasn't used to her standing tall. Finally, Samuel said quietly, "You've got two choices. You turn around now and leave, or you keep pushing and find out how far I'll go to protect them." The standoff stretched in silence. The man's fingers twitched near his gun again, but then his eyes shifted. He saw the way Samuel stood, calm, unshaken, and he saw Clara behind him, no longer afraid. He spat again, then yanked his reins. "Fine," he growled. "But this ain't over." As he turned his horse, Samuel's voice came steady and low. "It's over the moment you ride away. Don't make the mistake of coming back." The man gave him one last hateful glare before kicking his horse and riding off. The other two followed without a word. Only when the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance did Clara let out a shaky breath. Her knees almost gave out, and Samuel caught her before she fell. "Easy," he said softly. "It's done." She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "He'll come back," she whispered. "Men like him always come back." Samuel shook his head. "Not if he knows what's good for him. And if he does, I'll be here." For a long moment they just stood there in silence, the setting sun painting everything gold. The boys ran up and hugged their mother's legs. She smiled through her tears and pulled them close. That night, Clara sat by the fire while Samuel fixed the broken door. The house felt different, warmer, safer. She watched the way he worked quietly, never boasting, never demanding anything. It was the kind of strength that didn't need to shout. Later, when the boys had fallen asleep, Clara stepped out to the porch where Samuel was sitting. The stars were bright, the air cool and still. "I never thanked you," she said softly. Samuel looked up from his cup of coffee. "You don't have to." "I do," she insisted. "No one ever stood up for me before. I thought I'd have to live that way forever." Samuel stared into the distance. "You don't owe me anything, Clara. You did the hardest part yourself. You found the courage to stand up to him." She smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I wouldn't have done it if you hadn't shown me what it looks like to be brave without being cruel." For the first time in a long time, Samuel smiled too. It was a small, quiet smile, the kind that meant more than words. Days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch slowly found its rhythm again. Clara cooked breakfast every morning. The boys helped Samuel with chores, and laughter began to fill the place where silence once lived. She learned to ride a horse, to mend fences, to brand calves. Her hands grew stronger, her eyes brighter. One evening, Samuel rode into town for supplies and ran into the sheriff. "Heard about that trouble you had," the sheriff said. "That fella's gone. Left town a few days after. Guess he figured out Millstone wasn't his place anymore." Samuel nodded silently. He didn't need to say anything. The sheriff clapped him on the shoulder. "You did right, Sam. Sometimes right ain't easy, but it's still right." When Samuel returned home that evening, Clara and the boys were waiting on the porch. The smell of stew filled the air, and the youngest boy ran to him, shouting, "Mr. Sam, I fixed the fence gate like you showed me." Samuel lifted him up with a laugh. "You did, huh? Bet it's straighter than mine now? Clara watched the moment with a warm smile. She still carried scars, inside and out, but they no longer defined her. She had found something new here. Peace. After dinner, when the boys were asleep, Samuel sat outside again. Clara joined him, bringing 2 cups of coffee. The night sky stretched above them, wide and endless. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked softly. He shook his head. No reason to. Everything I need's right here. She looked at him, her heart quiet but full. You've given us a new life, Samuel. I'll never forget that. He turned his head, meeting her eyes. You gave yourself that life, Clara. I just opened the door. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the wind through the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and the stars shimmered above the dark hills. Clara leaned back in her chair, a faint smile on her lips. For the first time in my life, she said softly, I'm not afraid anymore. Samuel nodded slowly. You don't ever have to be. Not here. The firelight flickered in the distance, casting long shadows across the porch. The ranch was quiet, but it was no longer lonely. It was alive again, filled with hope, laughter, and the sound of 2 boys dreaming of a better tomorrow. And somewhere deep inside her heart, Clara knew the truth. The man who had once said, You're coming with me, hadn't just rescued her from a broken life. He had given her and her children a home, a future, and the courage to believe that kindness could heal even the deepest wounds.